Okay, I guess if we're ready, does everybody feel ready? Then we'll we'll get rolling. I'll kick things off. We're going to start off by talking about Haviva's book. We're going to be listening to some of her responses to my questions to her about the book, and then the last 15 minutes or so, we're going to take questions. So save all your good questions for the end, and don't despair if you don't get your questions in, because you can always send them to me or Haviva when it's all over. So I would like, first of all, to introduce myself to people who may not have met me. I went to the One Spirit Interfaith Spiritual Counseling Program, and that's where I met Haviva on Zoom. So it's pretty interesting that we're doing this on Zoom because that's where we first met, was in the Zoomosphere. One Spirit was doing Zoom rooms and Zoom classes long before the rest of the world caught on to that. And for that, we're eternally grateful. I am an Episcopal nun. I'm not a Roman Catholic. Don't be scared. I'm an Episcopal nun. Not many people know that Episcopal nuns exist, but we do. We're pretty rare, but we do exist, and we also exist in the Anglican Communion throughout the world. We're part of the Church of England. And I am the Mother Superior of a religious community. They call us Sister Superior. It's a little more humanistic to say Sister Superior instead of Mother. So I'm the Sister Superior of a community of 11 nuns in Mendham, New Jersey. We've been in existence since we were founded in Windsor, England in 1852. And we came to the United States in 1874. We were in New York City for about 50 years. Before I became a sister almost 10 years ago, I worked in motion picture advertising in Los Angeles for 20 years. So I went from swimming with sharks to working with churches, and couldn't have possibly made a better choice. And it was my desire to become part of the movement of reconciliation and healing, and bringing together people from different faiths, different cultures, things like that. That's what led me to One Spirit, to become a spiritual counselor. And that's where I met Haviva, because she had been through the seminary program, become an interfaith minister. And she and I both came to the program with the same desire, which was to learn about other faiths, to make friends from other faiths. And certainly the friends that we made there are some of the best people I've ever met in my whole life. And I would include Haviva in that. Even on Zoom from her home in Galilee, everybody could tell that she's a really special human being. Haviva is a writer and a rabbi. She's an activist. In 2006, she became the first woman to publicly receive Orthodox rabbinic ordination. Then she left Orthodoxy and began to call herself a post-denominational rabbi. And it was 10 years later that she went to One Spirit and became a minister, interfaith minister, an interspiritual rabbi. And then she became a spiritual counselor, and she's trained in dream work. She trained with the Reverend Judith Schaffman. And she has written 3 books. Is that right? 3 books about her spiritual journey. But this book, Hope Valley, is her first fiction novel. And what we're going to talk about tonight is this story, how it came to be, what the inspiration was, partially how One Spirit influenced it, how her friendships with people of different faiths have molded the story. And it's the story of 2 characters in Israel, and a lot of it comes from Haviva's own experience living in Israel at this particular time in history. And these are 2 women who come from, one's from a Jewish culture and faith, and the other one is from Palestinian Islamic faith. And somehow they find a way to find common ground, and it's not easy. And it serves as a really good model for those of us who are really struggling to figure out how to talk to people of different faiths and different cultures. And their interaction with each other provides a really good way to structure our own interactions with people with whom we differ for whatever reasons. And so that being said, did I get everything in your introduction that I should, Haviva?
Sure. Well, let's see. You could say that I run a mikveh ritual bath. So that's a little interesting tidbit as well on my kibbutz where I live. And there is a water theme in the book too. So yeah.
Yes, that's right. That's right. All right. Well, we'll kick it off with some questions. The first one is, I think on most people's mind, what is the initial spark that gave you the idea to write this story?
Okay. So I'll tell the story of how I got the idea, and maybe then I'll also give a little bit of the plot okay. So the original spark came when one day I was walking with my dog in the valley. So I live on a kibbutz, which is a Jewish kind of like a communal, intentional community. And it's on one side of a valley, and on the other side of the valley is actually a Bedouin village, although in the novel it's not a Bedouin village, but in reality, so there's a Bedouin village on the other side. And I was walking in the valley with my dog, and I saw a shepherd named Hussein, who I often see there. He was there with his sheep, but this time a woman was with him, who I kind of assumed was his wife. And I went over to say hello, like I often do, and he introduced me to his wife. And then she looked at me and she asked how old I was. And I told her, which was then, now I'm 52. This was like around 10 years ago or something. And she started to cry, and she told me that her daughter was the same age as I was, and that her daughter had died of breast cancer. And so then I had this thought that if I had met her daughter, what maybe we might have talked about now. And I live with a muscular disease since I was a child. And so I thought also, maybe we could have connected over this shared living with illness. And when I walked home, I had this idea, this story started to come alive in my imagination of if these two women had met and what would they have talked about. So that was the original spark. And there's a lot of pieces of it, but another one that I really did want to write about was some of my own journey of having come to Israel, having moved here in my 20s, having grown up in a Zionist Orthodox Jewish home, although the character doesn't grow up in an Orthodox home. And having moved here out of this sense of like Zionist ideology and feeling like very righteous about my decision to move here. And it was all ideology, and leaving the United States, like what I considered more materialistic, and, coming to this more idealistic society. And then coming here and slowly over the years, discovering that the narrative that I had been told was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. And that there was this whole other story that I hadn't been told, that having made friends with Palestinian people and hearing their story, and that kind of awakening that I had, and wanting to share that type of a story in fiction, in a novel, the character Tikva, which is the Jewish woman in the book. And so that's another theme that I really wanted to explore and to share. So those two pieces came together to create this friendship. And well, should I just keep a little, maybe just a little more to tell what's going on with the story? And okay. And also I'll say that originally I wrote the book just from the point of view of Tikva, the Jewish woman. And it was I wrote many drafts of the novel. And at some point I felt that I could write also from the point of view of Ruby, or Rabia is her given name, and she goes by Ruby, her nickname. And when I started to write from her point of view as well, that's when I feel like the book really, really came alive. It's told from the alternating points of view of the two women. And another piece that came later too is the front story of the book is in the summer of 2000, which is right before the Intifada, the second Intifada broke out in Israel. And you feel that tension building in the book. And there's a backstory in 1948. So this is like the premise of the book, is that the two women meet in the valley, and I'm not giving away too much because this happens right at the beginning, but I won't give away more than this, is they discover, and they don't become friends right away. So there's tension between them and suspicion and fear. And they discover right away that Tikva is living in the house that Ruby's father had grown up in. And when he was 20 years old in 1948, the villagers were expelled from the village by the Haganah, by the Jewish soldiers, and they were expelled, and I won't tell what else happened, and they were not allowed to come back, and the village was destroyed, except this one house was left standing, and that's the house that Tikva lives in when the novel in 2000 is taking place. And Ruby had been living abroad for 25 years and came back to her childhood village in Israel for cancer treatments. She has lung cancer, and she's left this letter from her father, who died, that he had left his diary in the house. So when she finds out that Tikva is living in that house, she wants to befriend her, but kind of on false pretenses that she wants to befriend her so she can get into the house and find the diary. But then slowly they actually do become friends, and I won't give away more than that. Yeah. Okay.
And you touched on some of the parts of the book that are autobiographical. And I think one thing that you had mentioned to me that I found really interesting was that you said when you moved to Israel, you started to learn the history, and you started to think, now that I know the history, what do I do? And the character that you wrote also comes to this realization that is, wow, this history is really complicated. Now what do I do about it? And so I think that's a really interesting thing in the book. These two characters, of course, are symbols of the conflict between those two cultures, and they find a way forward together. And has it changed writing the book? I know it's probably been cathartic. Has it changed your perspective on that story, on that conflict from what it was?
Interesting. So first of all, the book is, it is fiction. But as I said, it took me 8 years pretty much from start to finish, till it was actually published, and here it is. And I'll show it again after it. So I think at the beginning, a lot of the writing was actually more cathartic and therapy and kind of me figuring things out. And when I decided to do that like piece of the plot where she's living in the house, that was sort of this nightmare I'd always had. Like, what would I do if a Palestinian, came and knocked on my door and said, "Oh, this is where I live"? Now, the truth is, my house actually we built from scratch on a piece of land, but it's more just the idea, And so so just playing that out in the novel for myself, and me figuring out, maybe what would I have done? Like, a lot of the writing did go through, and a lot of what I wrote didn't end up in the book, because one thing I learned with fiction is that everything in the book has to serve the story and move the plot forward. And so a lot ended up on the cutting floor, but it doesn't matter. That was part of the writing process, and in my own working things out. And I won't give away the end, but I didn't know how it was going to end, and I didn't know what Tikva would decide. So part of that was just seeing what she would do. Yeah.
That's great.
And Ruby as well. Yeah.
So the characters really came to life and made their own decisions as you wrote them. That's pretty neat.
Yeah, definitely.
And the next question I had was about how your time at One Spirit influenced this story, and how it evolved as you were going through the program. You were working on this story. So how did that influence you?
Yeah. So it definitely did. First of all, so I was in the two programs. I was in the ministry program and the ISC program, and as you know, because you read the book, and actually, I don't think did you say that I gave a draft to Sister Monica to read, there is a whole, yeah, there's this whole in the backstory, but I won't give too much. There's a diary, there's excerpts from the diary in the backstory, and there is a convent. There's a convent in the valley here. I don't know if you can see. There's a cross over. The light is flashing off, but there's a cross in the valley, and there's this is the moshav, the Jewish village. It's not a kibbutz, it's a moshav, which is an agricultural village, and this side is the Muslim village, and there's this cross in the middle, and the cross actually is this symbol, which maybe I'll read a little piece of that, but the cross is always hovering over in the horizon, and it was there in 1948, and it's still there in 2000, and there's a convent there. So, and there's another convent in the other that I won't give too much away, but anyway, so there was all this convent stuff, and so I was like, oh, Sister Monica, can you read my novel to make sure I got all that stuff right? And then it turned out, you're not a Catholic nun, but okay, but no more than I do. So
yeah, you're English Catholics, so
okay. Okay. So anyway, so I ended up giving it to you to read, and that really also our friendship, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, in terms of friendships across some cultural and religious differences. So so that was really your connection, and then you read it again when it came out. Now, so how do one spirit affect it? So there's a bunch of, I think, some of my favorite practices in the ministry program that we had every month. We were learning about a different religion, and a lot of that made its way into the book. There's a prostration scene, which maybe I'll read either now or like right before we're going into questions, maybe right before we're going into questions. There is a prostration scene where the two women prostrate themselves together in the forest. And that was definitely from my experience in Islam month. So I'd say, a lot that I learned about Christianity, and there's a lot of Jesus in here, and just like, there's just
there's Buddhism.
So Buddhism. So I was going to say that I think, well, first of all, the Buddhism, the two women are both ill. The other, Tikva, has multiple sclerosis, which is not what I have. And I have muscular dystrophy, and I purposely wanted to distance myself somewhat from her, and she has multiple sclerosis. But the two women they bond over the fact that they both are living with illness. And in the prostration scene, which I guess I will read part of it, there's definitely this, what I'd say, I guess, is that more than it is somewhat of an interfaith book, but I feel like it's more of an interspiritual, or even just a spiritual book in general, that this idea that there's something beyond even the religion that connects the women. And there's the Buddhism, really, this idea of kind of what I call here is, what is it, to go, it is 2:00 in the morning here.
You're doing very well.
Okay. It's letting go into the flow. I mean, it's, that idea of just not fighting it and just surrendering. I mean, surrendering is really what it's about. And so that's something that helps, that Ruby shares with Tikva as something that helps her deal with the fact that she is ill. So there's that whole theme. And there's maybe just about the cross. So there's this, I'll just read just for this idea of the cross being kind of this thing that it doesn't represent Christ. It's really the cross it's really a symbol more of hope. And I think of it as, it's this thing that's hovering above everything that they all kind of connect to it. And I should say, there's so much to say, and I'm not going to be able to say most of what I want to say. There's the olive tree, there's the tree of hope. So that's, you only see a piece of it here, but it's a tree that there actually are these olive trees, these ancient olive trees near where I live, and they're amazing. So this one is supposed to be 2,000 years old. And it was supposed to have been planted by Jesus's father, Joseph. And it has 3 trunks. So these trees they're just amazing. Like you can walk into them among the trunks, and they're all from the same tree, but they're just different trunks that are all connected, and they're all of the same tree. So this one in the novel has 3 trunks, and so it's supposed to be symbolizing the 3 Abrahamic faiths, and they come together and they form a canopy over whoever's sitting beneath them. So you have the 2 women go there to talk all the time. And also in the backstory in 1948, the 2 characters who you meet, they sit under the same tree. And so this is called the Tree of Hope. So that is an interfaith idea, but it's the canopy though, really, where they all kind of meet together. And that's really also the cross. So like Ruby, when she's sitting and she's looking up at this cross, and this is toward, like 2/3 of the way through. So I don't want to say exactly what's going on, but she took a puff from her cigarette and looked up at the golden cross, the same one that had brought her father. Oh, see, I'm already giving away.
Spoiler alert.
The same one that had brought her father and Marie together years ago. What was it about that cross that had drawn her father that day? Its glow seemed of a different time and place. Or was it that it seemed timeless and placeless? Yes, that was it. It evaded time and space. It was a promise of better times, better places. It was a symbol of hope. She thought of one of her favorites of her father's poems. Her father, Jamal, was a poet, which she had always read as an ode to his village lost. It was titled Beneath the Olive Tree. If only to dwell within you again, even if only for one more night, to sleep in the bosom of your weathered, wearied, battered self, and rest my own weathered, wearied, battered self there in longing, free of guilt and shame, full of hope, only hope. So that's the cross, and so that's just, gosh, there's so much.
There is. And I think when you asked me to take a look at the one of the early versions of the novel, I was so honored because I thought, wow, what do I know? But I thought, what a great thing to model to other people, to be so respectful and so sensitive of other faiths, to ask people of those faiths to take a look at this. And you did this with your Islamic friends as well.
Yeah, here in Israel, I had friends read it, and not just the faith, but also the narrative, so many stories. I guess I should also say that I'm a member of various kind of communities and groups, and one is my children the older ones are already out of school. Younger ones go to a school that's an interfaith, intercultural school. And it's bilingual, so everything is in Hebrew and Arabic. There's 2 teachers in the class. One is speaking Hebrew, one speaking Arabic, and in all the classes all the time. And so there's a whole community around that school too, and we do a lot of activities. Also, the parents. I'm also part of this group, which I just think that you would all love. It's kind of like spiritual counseling. We meet. It's a Palestinian Jewish group in my area in Galilee, and we meet, and each month we hear a story from a different person, either in the group or someone who's invited to tell their story. And you're just supposed to sit and listen in non-judgment. And for the first half of the group, you just sit and hear the story. And then we break, and then we come back and either ask questions that are either clarification or just questions like the kind that we ask in spiritual counseling, just curiosity, open questions, and or you reflect back, something of how it touched you, how the story touched you. But it's not a dialogue group, it's not a debate group, and that's just so much of what the book is about. With also the 2 women, that they become friends by just listening and respecting each other's stories and acknowledging each other's pain. Which is what I really do feel needs to happen here, and it is happening here on some on some level. So a lot of the book also is about, it's not maybe not so explicitly, it's not a dogmatic book, it's a novel, it's a story, it's you just kind of go along with the characters, but this idea of healing collective trauma and needing to heal it and then move forward together in peace and friendship. So that's a big part of the book, and I think that does reflect what I studied, what I learned at One Spirit.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the concept of holding space for others is really present in this book, of holding a loving, compassionate, respectful space for the stories of these two women who come from really rigid narratives that they've been told, and yet they're finding a way to listen to the other narrative and say, I'm open to this. Maybe not at first, because they have a lot of fear of each other going into it, but they learn, as we all need to learn, how to hold space for the other narrative and sit and listen, just like in your group. I see a lot of that in this story. And it really taught me so much about what's going on in Israel right now, because I had bought into one narrative, one story. And you said something really interesting, because I had asked you before, is there any one credible source about the history of Israel? And you said there are many voices, and some are more prominent than others. It's more of a tapestry of that story, which is it's a really educational book in that way. And the way that the characters meet a total stranger and they start talking about the political situation in Israel, that was really interesting to me. I didn't realize people did that.
Well, you'll have to come and see.
Yes, indeed. Yes. And also the story of how you found, in your own life, you found that convent.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. So that is just one of these things where fiction and truth, I don't know, reality just sort of meet is. So I had actually written the book already, but so the village, the Moshav where Tikva lives is fictional, but it's a composite of various different Jewish towns, villages in my area, and also the Palestinian village that existed, that it was built on top of. And maybe I didn't say that the village was destroyed and then the Moshav was built on top of it. And this does happen. This happened in 48 when, where I live. And part of, for me, was discovering that is true, like that places that my friends, my friends live in, my kids, that I drop them off, to visit their friends, that these were once Palestinian villages that were, not all of them, but some. And then when I would meet the people, like I have friends, Palestinians, who live, let's say, in Nazareth, and their family used to live in the village across the way that is now underneath a moshav, and that this to me is just, that they live in the area still, and they see it all the time. There's a point where I say in the novel that, and this is based on truth, that there's a neighborhood in Nazareth that's named, I'll say actually that's Sefaria, which it's named that because a lot of the people who lived in Sefaria, when they were expelled from the village, if they didn't go to Syria or Lebanon, they went to Nazareth, and there's this neighborhood where they live. And meanwhile, it's like right across the way from where Sefaria used to be, and now Tzipori stands. So that's one example. I'm trying to remember what you had asked me that I was saying this, but I don't remember, but I'll just keep talking.
That's okay. And where you found the convent.
Oh, the convent, right. So that's where it is. Okay, great. Yeah. So I had based this is not about Sefaria exactly, but it's that and other villages with other stories that are in it as well. And in my imagination, I had read historically that there had been a convent there. And so there's this in the 1948 backstory, there's a whole thing that goes on in this convent, which I won't give away. And I had in my imagination what it might have looked like. And I wrote the whole thing. And then one day when I went for a mammogram in Nazareth. I lived 15, 20 minutes from Nazareth. And I went there for a mammogram with a friend of mine. And she had read a draft of the book. And while we were waiting for our turn to go into the mammogram, she was giving me her feedback on the novel. And then we were driving home and she said, oh, you know that convent you wrote about? I was there. I said, what do you mean you were there? She said, like she's older than I am. She said, oh, I don't know, 20 years ago, I was hiking with my kids in the area and we came across this convent. And she said, I think that's the one you're talking about. So I said, oh my gosh, so she said, let's go there. Let's find it. On the way home from the mammogram, we stopped and we hiked into the valley there, and we found there is a convent there. It's called the Holy Family, something of the Holy Family, and it's not, and it looked so much like what I had imagined it to look like, which is what I kept saying to her, like, my novels come to life, and anyway, so that's just one example, but yeah, and so that's something about also like writing about a place that I live in, and then just discovering all these kind of little secrets about it that, not if they're secrets exactly, but they're stories that people carry and they're not talked about. And in this group, like I'll say that a couple of very poignant stories, as long as maybe I'll just talk about that because they're okay. This one man who told about his family who had been living in Sefaria, which is that village that I said that was destroyed, the real one, not the one here is called Yakut al-Jalil, the Sapphire of Galilee. But he told us in our sharing group how he lives in Nazareth and that his family had lived in Sefaria, and there was a national park built, an archaeological national park. They did a huge dig in the real place of Sipori, and it's an amazing national park with really amazing finds. And he went with his brother all these years. He had never gone back. It's just across the road. He had never gone back, and his brother said, we have to go back. And they went to go see. And then when you enter the national park part, you have to pay. And he said he could not bring himself to pay to go into the village where his family had lived, so he didn't go in. And now when he was talking this was a few years ago, he's in his 60s, and he said that when he retired from teaching, he's a teacher, he retired and he got himself a card to be able to go into all the national parks in the whole country. And now he said he goes there often because he doesn't have to pay when he goes in. He just shows his national park card and he can go in. So to me, that was just all these kinds of stories like that, to me, were just so eye-opening. Gosh, and I have so many, but okay, I'll
And I really commend you for stepping outside this heroic narrative that you have, been brought up to believe, and accepting somebody else's narrative too. Just like Americans are really finally starting to reckon with the fact that our American story that we've told ourselves is just propaganda. That's not the real story. And there is this whole other narrative that's the truth of it. And we're coming to grips with the fact that we inflicted trauma on another people. What do we do about that? And how are we still doing that? And I see your character in the book doing the same thing. Instead of saying, we're the victorious conquerors, you're willing to say, how can we work this out together and heal and reconcile and maybe look at some kind of reparations? The daughter in the book really provides a voice for that, which is just wonderful to hear.
So yeah, there's the daughter, and she's well, that's another piece which comes up pretty soon toward the beginning, where she's in a relationship with a Palestinian Israeli man, but one thing I do want to say is that what I feel like, and I've been told, and I guess I intentionally did, was that it's not just about tikva, just, sort of like going, oh, I sin, this is, it's the two, it's really both of them coming. And I would say also that what you said about the truth that she was told wasn't the truth. So I really feel like it's more that she wasn't told the whole truth. At least here where I live, that's the story, is that it's not that she was told any lies, but there were like pieces missing, that she just wasn't told, that were just not told. And a big thing about the book, I think, too, is that it's about both of them coming to deal with their pain and their collective pain and collective guilt, even, at least, and then just to move past it. And that's the big part of it, like not to deny that it happened on either side. And I think a big difference also is that the conflict is still going on here very much. It's still very much alive. Which, well, whatever, we don't have to just compare. There are two different stories going on, but it's something that's just every day here. You still feel it as a conflict.
The younger generation story is particularly interesting to me as a reader, because the younger generation shows me what could be done. And you've talked about this. This is a story about making peace and moving forward. And I think that's a great perspective, because the older people, the parents' generation, were stuck in they didn't know what else to do, and then your generation and my generation is sort of a bridge. And then there's this new generation that says, look, here's what we need to do. I think that's a wonderful portrayal of new ideas. The daughter brings in some really good points and some good ideas about how can we make peace and move forward. I think it's amazing that you could write. I couldn't write a person that young.
The daughter.
Yeah.
Well, I'm living with a bunch of them, so.
Oh, good.
Yeah. And there's the dog too. So the dog is really the one who I feel like she's really the bridge. I don't know if you know in the book, but she brings the two women together, and she's a Canaan dog. So she also represents the land that, without even the people, that she's something more pure, that's just the land itself. So
that's right. The creatures were there before the people.
Yeah,
it's great. Yeah. Well, I think would you like to move into questions now, or do you feel like we've questions from the audience?
Yeah, we definitely could. I had this scene I wanted to read, but maybe we'll see if there's time at the end instead.
Okay.
Or whatever you want me to do.
Let's see. Maybe you can read the scene from the book, and then people can raise their hands if they have questions, and I'll call on you in the after the reading.
Okay. Well, one reason why I wanted to read this is just because it is a scene that I really felt one spirit and my experience there coming through in this scene. So it's really, I'll just read the last piece of it, but it's the two women they're in the forest together, they're foraging. A few of the scenes take place in the forest foraging, and they're in the valley foraging, I'm sorry. And then they go into the forest because it gets hot, and they go into the forest, and they sit down to talk. And Tikva hadn't told Ruby yet that she has multiple sclerosis, and then she reveals it to her. And all along, Ruby had suspected there was something, and she didn't know quite what it was. I don't know if you remember this. So they sit down and they're talking. And so, and Tikva she's talking about the water and the ocean, and she misses the ocean. She grew up on Long Island, and she misses the ocean. Okay. Tikva looked wistful. Oh, I should also say, there's some Arabic in here, and I've been studying Arabic for years, and my Arabic does not sound, my accent is terrible. So you'll have to bear with me. And there's a little bit of singing, and I also am not a singer at all, but I'm going to leave my comfort zone and do this.
This is a safe space.
I never sing in public, so okay. Tikva looked wistful. I spent my best childhood times at the beach. I also lived in Tel Aviv for years before coming to Galilee. When we first moved here, I didn't miss it so much. I had my art and the cabins. Both women are artists. By the way, I'm sorry. I have someone, and the cover see is a painting, which my daughter did, who is an artist, but it's supposed to be one of the women's paintings. And there's a, I don't know if you can see. No, you can't. There's a like a watermark here, and it's also supposed to represent like that it's a work in progress, like this country. Okay, I'll go back. Okay. When we first moved here, I didn't miss it so much. I had my art and the cabins. Talia was still at home. That's her daughter. But now she is grown and my art is gone. I feel blocked. I used to see a picture in my head that I needed to get down on canvas. It was like I was channeling a vision that needed to become an image for others to see. But it's been so long since I've had that ability. I don't know how to get it back. Ruby remembered one of her most powerful lessons from the ashram. Did you try surrendering? She too could use a dose of that now. Surrendering? It's when you stop trying to swim against the current and just let it carry you instead. It's about learning to surrender to the flow instead of trying to grab onto rocks along the way. Ruby lifted a stone from the ground, tossed it up, and caught it. Because in the end, you won't be able to hold on forever. Rocks are slippery, and no one has endless strength. Nothing is permanent. Everything is constantly in flux, even if we don't realize it or want to admit it. Even a rock gets worn away by water eventually. Tikva looked like she was considering Ruby's suggestion. It's a powerful idea, but I can't make myself surrender. I have to feel it somehow. When I'm in the water, I feel something. It's surrounding me, holding me, lifting me, and I'm part of its vastness. A Muezzin chorus sounded from the surrounding villages. Allahu Akbar. Ruby looked at Tikva. They're calling for prayer. I have not prostrated myself in so many years. But you know, I've been thinking about giving it another try. And this might be just what you need now too, an embodied practice. Sufis explain the prostration pose as a physical surrender to Allah, to the beloved, to what is, with a capital W and a capital I. Sufis? Muslim mystics, kind of like your Kabbalists. And it's not particularistic. It's like Buddhism in that way. There was a woman Sufi mystic and poet with a name like mine, except pronounced a bit differently, Rabia Basri. My father told me he had her in mind when he and my mother chose my name. Ruby removed the blue headscarf she had tied on that morning, spread it out on the dirt, and knelt down on the puddle-like makeshift prayer rug. She could see Tikva was trying not to stare at her bald head, which shocked Ruby, too, as much as the sight of herself with a headscarf did. Remember, she has cancer. She was no shaved-headed Buddhist monk, would not even call herself a Buddhist at all. She felt no need to limit herself with a label, but she did find much wisdom there. Ruby patted the ground, motioning for Tikva to join her. Tikva knelt beside Ruby. They both looked out at the view of Mount Sapir and at the reservoir below. Two birds were circling above, a pair of Vanelli's eagles, a rare sighting. Her father said seeing even one was a good omen, but a pair could be the harbinger of miracles. Then again came the call, Allahu Akbar. Ruby closed her eyes and reached to the sky. Slowly, she brought her head down to the earth and spread her arms out before her. She held that position for a few quiet moments before straightening and reaching her arms up again. A perfect combination of the prostration posture she had watched her father do 5 times a day and child's pose from her later years of practicing yoga and meditation. This feels just right. Think about letting go into the flow. Ruby looked around and started to sing, improvising as she went along. Picture yourself in a boat on a river with cedar pine trees and sapphire skies. The Muezzin calls you, you answer by bowing. She looked into Tikva's eyes. A woman with hazel cat eyes. Tikva in the flow with Ruby. Tikva in the flow with Ruby. She took a breath. Why don't you try it, she added, still in the tune of the adapted Beatles song. Very cute, Tikva laughed. Then Ruby laughed. And then they both became silent when the muezzin called again. Just try it, Ruby said. I don't know. Jews bow like that only on Yom Kippur. It's one of the only times Alon and I go to synagogue. I guess that's the Jewish day of surrender. Yes, exactly. Surrendering to life or God. It's a human need. If we want to prevent our own suffering, it's not limited to Buddhism or Islam. Tikva looked out at the view and thought, I guess Yom Kippur is coming up, and doing the posture out here does speak to me more than doing it inside the synagogue, closed in by walls, surrounded by other people. Well, you're welcome to join me if you want. Ruby lifted her arms, reaching up to the sapphire sky. Sapir, Yakut al-Jalil. Even when the village itself was gone, even with all the pain that was buried beneath these pine trees, the sky remained so purely blue. The next time the muezzin called, Ruby folded Tikva's hand in hers, and she felt no resistance. Allahu Akbar. God is the most great. God is the most vast. God is all that is. She closed her eyes and asked for the strength to surrender. A strong, warm wind blew along her scalp and on her cheeks. She took a deep breath, letting the scent of life fill her nostrils. Life that would be in this very same spot long after both she and Tikva, and also Cain, that's the dog, were gone. Even the tree of hope would not last forever, but the flow would continue. Ruby lowered her face to the ground, Tikva's hand still warm in hers. Her eyes were closed, but she knew Tikva was bowing along with her. She felt the energy of her own surrender flowing from her heart and through her arm, her hand, the tips of her fingers, into Tikva's fingers, her hand, her arm, and up into her heart. And for those few long minutes, there was no separation. I feel it, Ruby, Tikva whispered. I feel one with the flow. Thank you.
A lot of muted claps. Very nice. Okay.
Questions? Khadija, I see.
Hi, Khadija.
This is less than a question and more that, alhamdulillah, I am so pleased with what you were able to pull together. I ordered the book and I remember you writing about it, and sometimes you'd ask me a question or something. I think that, you know, I just want to acknowledge and say perseverance is the secret of success. But, you know, I've missed you, and, you know, the few times that Haviva, you and I connect, it just seems like there's 1,000 years between us and 1,000,000 miles, but then we connect. So it's, you know, I just had to be here. I was actually teaching and I just rearranged everything. And I said, no, I have to do this, you know.
Well, thank you.
I see you.
Thank you. And it's so nice to see you. I remember now, even when I asked you something about hijab.
Yeah.
And I think I asked you if it's this, like, I find all these different things, like if you say she's wearing hijab or is she wearing a hijab, and I found like all different things, you know, people saying this, people saying that, and I'm like, oh, I just have to ask Khadija what she would say. So
yeah.
So yes. Which is it?
well, it actually depends on how you're using it. You'll say she's wearing a hijab, or you make it an adjective almost. But usually you'll just say, oh, she's wearing a hijab, because not every Muslim woman wears a hijab. That's a particular style of scarf or covering. Yeah. Like, I don't wear hijab, I wear gele. So it depends on who's speaking and what is the nature of the conversation. Did you want a simple answer? There isn't one.
No, I know, and I know that from Judaism, because when people ask me questions, I'm like, "Oh, sit down," like,
Yeah, yeah. You got a minute? I got a mile. Right? Yeah. And Sister Monica, I see you. I see you. I'm not gonna
Lots of
hog more
love.
time, but I just had to be the older, bodacious woman in the room for a minute to just say that my heart is so full to see you.
Oh,
Oh, thank you. Well, mine is full too, and it's beating back.
Yep.
yeah.
Sound like them.
Welcome, salam.
I think Ed has his hand up. Hi, Ed.
I do. It's so great seeing you guys, especially together and all the other classmates. And Khadijah, who I never see around anywhere, right, Khadijah? But speaking of persistence, I love the spider story.
Oh, goodness.
Share it.
Oh, sure. Oh, my goodness. There's so much in this book that's one spirit. Okay. Gosh, wow. And I was there for 4 years. And yeah, okay. The spider. So, wow. So the spider. So I swim. For any of you, some of you know this who are out there. I swim every day, and that's part of my therapy, my soul therapy, my mind therapy, my body therapy. And in this lane that we built on our property along the house, it's a naturally filtered swimming lane. So these spiders sometimes come to visit. And I was taking Ed's class, and more than that, I mean, it transformed. Wow. Anyway, yes. And just, learning to notice these things, right? Like I was actually afraid of spiders as a kid. And now spider is my spirit animal. And when I was writing the book, so if you remember this, Ed, I hope maybe that I had gotten some rejections. I couldn't find an agent, and then then the agent couldn't find a publisher, and then the agent said to me, this was before I had the backstory in 1948, and he said to me, I think you need to make the novel. You need to think bigger, and it's like a quiet novel. And I was just like, I don't know if I can do it. And then Spider. I hadn't seen Spider in a while, and she showed up just then. And one morning I came out, and there was this huge web that she had spun for me right at the entrance to the pool that I couldn't miss it. Like I needed to go through it to get into the pool. And I took pictures of it with the light just shining on it. And it was just this message, like, you can do, if Spider can do it, if, Spider sometimes has to start over, and just, her web just gets knocked down, and she builds a more beautiful one, and it was just so clear to me that was the message, and I did, and here it is, and she came back, right? So I sent you that post that just when I was getting, I think it was when the galleys came back to me or something like that, and I hadn't seen Spider in a while, and she came back again just then too. That's just the way it is. And that's in the book too. I have to say, as a fiction writer now, because this is my first novel, I found like the symbolism, like that tree with the 3 trunks. I didn't do that on purpose. It was there. And then I noticed it because they sat under this tree, but I had never thought of it as like, that's what it is. And then when I realized that that's what it is, then I just kind of highlighted it in the book a little bit so that the reader might notice it too. But life is it's just like that, right? Like the signs are just out there, and you just have to notice them. So yeah. And the dog too. The dog was there in the book, and she was a Canaan dog, and her name wasn't Cain. Now it's Cain. She had a different name. And then all of a sudden, I realized, like, one of the last drafts, I was like, oh, her name is Cain. That's what her name is supposed to be. And then I put in this piece about when she decided to name her Cain. And there's a story of Cain and Abel in the Bible. And she says, she chose the name Cain because it's a Canaan dog. And because of it evokes Cain in the Bible, where Cain is sort of the misunderstood, sort of like underdog, and the one who commits this murder. But really, if you look at and kills his brother, but if you look at the narrative really in this, it's not so clear, like, was he guilty? Did he do it on purpose? Was God like enticing him into and so just like the story here in this country where I live, in the land where I live, it's a very complicated story, and it's not so clear, who, if anyone's guilty at all, is it just fate? Is it just, so that was just something else with the dog. I mean, so much of the book was like that, where it's just, I told the story and then it just came alive on its own, and the symbolism and everything. Yeah. So thank you, Ed, for asking that.
Brian has his hand up.
Hello. Oh, perfect. Okay. Oh, so fellow Gen Xer, I want to just point out that like when Sister Monica mentioned our generation, I found that I live in America, and I'm recently just became an American, and I've noticed that it's the older generation which kind of clings to the more sort of tribal nativist aspects of our nature, and the younger generation. I was briefly a step parent, and I kind of like was able to witness what the teenage generation looks like now, and it was new to me, and we're kind of in the middle. We have one foot. We were raised by parents who are maybe more nativist and tribal, raising children who are more tolerant. And I'm wondering, where you're at, you're writing a story about young women. What effect are the young having on the older generation that you've witnessed?
So yeah, so Sister Monica, you were asking me kind of a similar thing, right? So it's not so clear cut, I feel, here. First of all, I'm 52, so it's like this in between, right? And in the book, she has a daughter. She has one daughter, one child, and her daughter is in this romantic relationship with a Palestinian man, and they live in Jaffa, and they both are active in coexistence, or today they call it shared society. Back in 2000, they called it coexistence. It changed, the lingo changes. But the reality, I'd say that's in the book, but it's not so clear cut here. I mean, really, I think there's a lot of people here, young people, who are even more, I don't know if you call it fundamentalist, nationalist, and a lot actually of the people in my narrative sharing group are actually more like my age and older. I'm like one of the younger in the group. But there are a lot of young people too, like Talia, the daughter in the book, who are involved in peace work and shared society and coexistence. And so I don't feel like it's necessarily a generational thing. I think it's more of a, I feel like it's like your soul nature kind of, if you're the kind of person who's more like universalist or, and it can change. I have friends who were very, very nationalist as when they were younger. And then as they got older and started to see the bigger picture, change their tune. I think something I said to you, Sister Monica, when we were talking about this, I also feel like that there's things are definitely changing here for the better in some ways. Like, for instance, Jews studying Arabic is way higher than it ever was. I know that, like, for a fact. But at the same time, there's what I call like backlash, so that I feel like, and maybe it's like that there too in the States, I don't know, but yeah. I definitely feel like there's so much progress and so much progressiveness and change and opening up and people doing, there's so much of this, these kind of peace groups and Palestinian Jewish groups, and there's so much of that peace work going on. But at the same time, it feels like society is getting so much more kind of like reactionary. And so I like to believe, and the book is called Hope Valley, and it's a hopeful book, and it ends hopefully too. And I feel like that's the biggest message about the book, is that we need to cling to hope, because I do feel like there is hope, and I feel like you can get, though, very depressed if you just look at the headlines, because they don't really tell the story so much about the people doing this kind of work. And if you just look at the headlines, and it can be really depressing. And if you look at election results, because here it's very divided. I know, like there too, that it's just, it feels like it's like 50-50 almost, but then it seems that the right wing keeps winning by a little bit or something. Although now, I don't know, we have a different elective, what do you call it? Electoral, whatever system here than you do. It can be very, very depressing. And I just like to keep, like, the school that my kids go to, that's this bilingual school. So there used to be 1 or 2 in the country, and now there's like 7 now. I mean, it's a growing movement. So that tells me a lot, and that you don't see on the front page of the newspaper. Someone just Susan wrote something in the chat, but
yeah, well, thank you.
Elders bring wisdom and perspective. Yeah, thank you, Susan.
That's true.
Yeah, and I think the reason we're seeing there's such reaction from the sort of older guard is that reaction is almost being forced. Their hand is almost being forced to play, because I think they're aware that this is trending in a more tolerant direction.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Haviva pointed something out to me when we were talking about this very thing. She said, with everything, you open up a little bit and then there's a huge pullback and a backlash, and you go toward the more humanistic, liberal, we would call it in the United States. And then there's this huge jerking it back into the past, and you sort of go forward by fits and starts with any kind of progressive movement. So I think that's what we're seeing all over the place now. The arc of the moral universe bending toward justice. Well, I don't see any other hands raised unless I'm. Oh, Renee! Hi, Renee.
Renee?
Oh, you're gonna have to unmute yourself, Renee.
Haviva, I've been to Israel so many times, and I'm curious, how is this book being received? Are you doing any book talks there, or what is happening with receiving this book now?
So I can't really answer that yet, because people have read it, and I've had almost all very positive reaction. I think one person so far told me she had trouble reading it because she felt it was too political. And it's a human story, and it happens in a place where there's just a lot of politics, and it does deal with that. So in that way, it's political, but I don't feel like it's a dogmatic book. That it definitely shows all these different points of view, and they're all valid and all of that. But I haven't. It was published in the United States by a small press in California, Bedazzled Ink. I'll give them a shout out, and they're wonderful. And I have. And people here so far that have read it, they ordered it, or they read the Kindle version. And I just now am getting it printed in Israel as well. And then I have a bunch of local talks to do. So it'll be interesting to see how people react to it. But so far, the people that have read it have all said that all positive. But I'm sure there are tons of people who will read it and say that not. I could say I posted something on Facebook about, we just had Independence Day here, Israel Independence Day. And I go on Israel Independence Day there's a group that gets together, and it's a group of Palestinians and Jewish Israelis, Palestinian Israelis and Jewish Israelis. And we usually go visit a destroyed village, and we hear stories from the people from the village, and then we get together and do a ceremony with singing and flowers, and so I posted something on Facebook about that, and some people wrote wonderful, and some people wrote no, on Israel Independence Day, that's not the thing you need to do. You need to be celebrating independence, and you can do that every other day of the year, but not in it. So there's all these different points of view, and I really do feel like one thing I learned in the spiritual counseling program is like to honor all those points of view as well. And I do feel like I'm able to also take that criticism in a different way than maybe I would have if I hadn't gone through the ISC program, where I can really, honor it and hear it and respect it and listen and hold it in non-judgment as well, and just kind of answer calmly. So, yeah.
Will it be in Arabic? Will it be printed? It's going to be in Hebrew, English, and would it be in Arabic?
Good question.
Wow. I would love for it to be, it's not even in Hebrew right now, it's in English. When I said I'm having it printed here, I'm having it printed in English. But I definitely would love for it to be also in Hebrew and also in Arabic. This just came out in April. I mean, we're in April still. So yeah, it just came out a few weeks ago. Yeah. And I'm really hoping that somebody will read it and say, oh, I really want to see this in Arabic or in Hebrew, because I mean, I could write in Hebrew, but not on the level that I was born in America. I grew up in New York. So I would want somebody who's a native Hebrew speaker to translate it, and someone who's a native Arabic speaker to translate it. But that would be wonderful. Wow. Yeah.
It would. It's very inspiring.
Thank you. Thank you.
Judith has a question. We'll take one more question from Judith.
Hello.
Hi there, Aviva. I want to say Mazel Tov, Yasher Koach. This sounds like a wonderful book. I wondered two things. Where can I get the book?
Oh.
Is it something I just Google on Amazon, or what do you think?
Yeah.
I have a link in the chat.
Thank you for asking that. Because it's also a small press, so I have to also do a lot of the promotion and publicity, and it's not my strength, as you can see, because I didn't even think of saying that. Okay.
That's okay.
So yes, it's on Amazon.
Okay,
and it's
great.
on also Bookshop for people who don't want to do Amazon. Is someone waiting? Oh, Sister Monica. Yeah.
There's the link.
Yay. So it's on Bookshop, it's on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and what else? Oh, there's something in Israel. Anybody's outside the United States, actually, I think anywhere. There's something called Book Depository, which does free delivery outside the United States. So in Israel, I'm always telling people to do it through Book Depository. And there's a Kindle version as well. And if you feel like going into your local bookstore, even if you already have the book, and show it to them and say, oh, I want you to carry this
Order
book.
it.
Because I don't live there, I can't go around peddling the book. So anyone who wants to do that.
That's great. I also had one other curiosity question. Have you ever heard of or read the book, The Lemon Tree?
Of course, yeah. And
okay.
I have to tell you something. Can I tell you something about that? Like
please.
The woman who's the not the writer, because the writer is a journalist. The
Sandy
woman, the woman who the book is about. She came to that narrative group that I talked about and told her story, and and then afterward, I also heard her speak in her house. This is what her house was being turned into an interfaith center, that house. And she spoke about it. There was a dedication of the center there, and I saw her there as well. So all of you, after you read my book, you should read The Lemon Tree.
Yeah. Very eye-opening. It just, in the beginning, when you were talking about Hope Valley, I sensed a connection for myself, only because that book, The Lemon Tree, which is nonfiction, opened my eyes when I read it some 8 years ago or whatever, to exactly what you're writing about. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful to see both of you. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Judy.
you to hear from you. Thanks.
All right, I think we can wrap it up if everybody feels complete. Is that what we say at One Spirit? Do we feel complete? And if anybody would like to stay on and just chit chat, I would love to catch up with some of you and all of you. And so we'll just bring the official thing to a close. Haviva, is there any sort of rabbinical blessing or something that you can give us as we're in? I don't want to put you on the spot.
Well, one thing I can say is I'm doing a wedding at 11 o'clock this morning. yeah. So I'm like, okay, I have wedding on the mind right now in terms of blessings. Wow. Well, there's the blessing Shechianu, which is that you say it's okay, I'll just say it. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shechianu v'kiyamanu v'higianu lazman hazeh, which means it's blessed are you, God. I don't like the King of the universe, so I'm trying to think of a spirit of the world, of the universe, who has given us life and sustained us and brought us to this moment. So I feel like just kind of this circle. It's just wonderful to be with you all again, and because I was writing this book when I was there, and I should say another memoir, which you mentioned. I have 3 memoirs, so I have another memoir coming out later in the year, which is about my time at One Spirit. So that's a little preview for that. So I was writing both of these books at that time, and to just be able to bring it, I guess, an offering to the community, and to thank you all for the part that you all played in it. It's just it feels like I needed to stay up till 2 o'clock in the morning the night before I'm doing a wedding to just do this. Yeah. So.
I want to thank you for involving me in this. It's been a wonderful learning experience for me, and I'm just so honored to be a part of such a great, important work.